Even I, Shop Dog Sam, will admit occasionally I'll tell you some stuff in these videos that you don't really need to know. Well, that's not the occasion here. I'm going to tell you some stuff that you really need to know this right here if you're going to rebuild your maytag. Notice that I didn't say restore, rebuild. It's a long ways from being restored. I put the rings in here. That's what I'm doing, is putting, I'm putting the new rings in here. And normally I just put them in there and just, go on because the cylinders are wore so bad. Not the case here. If you remember, this is a really good cylinder. And I done already put that ring down in yonder. And this right here is a 8,000. That feeler gauge will just go right in yonder. I'm going to call that 8,000. That's with a new ring. It's about good as you're going to get. I've seen them down like 5,000 or 6,000, but that's a little bit tight, I think, because the ring may expand, but as it wears, it will get wider, as the case of this ring that I put in the top here, just as a show and tell, and you can readily see that gap without even getting the feeler gauge on it. That's like 30 thousandths or a little bit more. That's a lot. And now it's time to install the rods. And when you look down in this crankcase, the rods actually can only go one way. I always, as a rule, assign the casting notch or either filing notch in here. I always assign that to the top at any time. But that would go right down in yonder on that journal. And then when you turn it around, see, it'll make that whole trip. It puts it in the center line of this hole right here. This gap over here, that's to tighten up the bolts on that other rod. But you put that like that right there, turn it over to where that is. Can y'all see down in yonder? Probably not. I'm going to go ahead and drop that cap off in there. A little oil in yonder. You can't get too much oil on a maytag. 30 weight, non-detergent. That's to the top right there. In order to get that rod on there, then that has to go all the way down there to the other side. And just hold that right down there till it goes down there. Don't let it fall out. And then put your finger down in there, and it's right yonder. And that notch goes to the top. Remember, there's an internal tooth lock washer on both rods. You really do need that internal tooth lock washer. Put back on there and tighten those up tight. Don't leave them loose. But you can see, oh yeah. And this is the correct procedure when building an engine like this. If you assemble the crankcase two halves together and you have the right side play and everything is correct there, then there's nothing more than you can do with that. That's not going to be the problem later on. Okay, now at this point I install the rods, and just I'm like 1,000ths or two, no more than 2,000ths back this way. Now the wrist pins is another story. Now, there's just nothing. I'm not going to make no new wrist pins, and there's very little wear. And remember, this is the top of the piston, and we're going to now's the time to install the pistons. Goes up like that. Okay, now we've got that. This is completely assembled with new rings, cleaned. There's nothing better that I can do to this engine at this point. Like I say, the wrist pins do have a few thousandths, not excessive. They do. But now this engine is a mismatch engine. The two halves of the engine block and the crankshaft is the only part of the original engine. This was a odd rod and this was an odd rod. They didn't match each other, and they did not match the crankcase. Very little filing on the caps and a good tight fit there. The piston, if you remember the piston fiasco, if you remember that, the miscut piston, okay, so we got another piston, but they were not, they were two totally other engines donated those parts. Remember, we're going to stagger the rings where the two are together. One will be completely around, opposite of that one. Align them to where they don't. And I will tell you something else too. When you're putting them rings in there, you got to remember the top half, that arc on the top where your ring gap is. It's like 1.25 inches if you was to measure compared to the 1/2 inch. So there's a greater distance between the side on the wrist pin down towards the bottom, which, you know, I tend to do that. We're going to put the cylinders on now. New gaskets, we're going to get her done. And I done already did lay in those caps to go on the wrist pins. It takes 4 of them. We done got them laid in off of another engine, and they didn't match the pistons. I mean, it's well, I believe it's going to be a gooder. The second one is just a mirror image, same thing as the other one. There is an offset on these crankshafts. If you look at the engine and try to line up the spark plugs, they are offset. Just trim your gasket to size. Just trim your gasket to fit. When I was laying everything out, I did go to the I put 2 little marks right down on the flange down there on this cylinder and this housing, just so that I would get them back on the, you know, at some point in time, especially this metal shaping here, this one down right here will be different than that one up there. So, but looking in yonder at them rings, there's no gap showing. It's good. It's a good, tight, snug engine. It's free as can be. No, it's smooth. Turns really good. And that's what you want. With a new set of rings, and as good as these cylinders were on the internal bore, it should be a really, really good engine. Turns over just really nice.